I still remember the weight of that folder hitting the table. The sound it made, a soft but final thud, as my brother Evan slid it across to me. "You're out, Claire. The board agrees. You're not what this company needs anymore." I stared at him, unable to process his words. Just 20 minutes ago, I'd walked into Romano's feeling proud in my navy dress, a notebook of ideas tucked under my arm. I thought we were celebrating his temporary promotion to CEO after Dad's stroke. Instead, the restaurant was empty except for us, just Evan, his smug smile, and a folder containing my termination. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said, swirling his wine. "I've already announced it internally." My chest tightened. For 6 years, I'd been the COO of Dalton Steelworks, the company our father built from nothing into a $30 million business. Now my own brother was throwing me away like trash. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to remind him who modernized our supply chain and doubled profits while he was busy taking clients to golf courses. Instead, I simply stood up, thanked him for dinner, and walked out with my head high. What Evan didn't know was that my quiet exit wasn't surrender. It was the calm before the storm. 2 months before Dad's stroke, he'd called me into his office late one evening. The factory floor below was quiet, machines finally at rest after the day's shift. Dad stood at the window, watching the sunset reflect off the metal silos. "Claire, there's something you need to know about your brother," he said, his voice unusually serious. "Evan's too hungry for power. If anything happens to me, don't trust him." I nodded, not truly understanding then how right he was. Dad opened his safe and pulled out a thick legal document. "This is an irrevocable trust. It gives you majority voting rights, 51%. If I'm ever incapacitated, Evan gets his share of profits, but you control the company." "Why not just tell Evan?" I asked. Dad's eyes looked tired. "Because he'd fight it. This way, if anything happens, you're protected legally before he realizes what's happening." He showed me his signature, the notary seal, the whole thing properly executed. Then he returned it to the safe. "A copy stays with Hank Rosen. Remember that." When Dad had his stroke 3 weeks later, I rushed to the office in panic. But the safe was already open, and the document was gone. For days after the dinner, Evan paraded around the office like a king. He moved into Dad's corner office before the end of the week. My things were packed in boxes, waiting in the hallway when I came to collect them. "Don't worry, sis," he said, leaning against the doorframe of what was once my office. "I'll make sure you get a decent severance. Family, right?" I said nothing as I carried my belongings out. Employees watched with confused faces. Some had tears in their eyes. We'd worked together for years. That afternoon, Evan called an all-hands meeting. I watched the company-wide email go out while sitting in my car in the parking lot. The subject line: "Exciting changes at Dalton Steelworks." Through the windows, I could see him gesturing grandly, pointing to a PowerPoint showing his vision. A vision that included laying off our most loyal employees, the ones Dad had personally hired decades ago. By evening, my phone was flooding with texts from concerned colleagues. Evan was already restructuring departments, canceling our community outreach programs, and looking into selling our historic original factory. Dad's pride and joy. But while Evan was busy playing king of the castle, I was making plans of my own. I drove 4 hours to Vermont the next day, following winding roads until I reached a small lake. Hank Rosen's cabin sat nestled among the pines, smoke curling from the chimney. Hank had been Dad's lawyer for 30 years and his friend for even longer. He greeted me with a sad smile, already knowing why I'd come. "He called me the day after Charles had his stroke," Hank said, pouring me tea at his kitchen table. "Very pleased with himself, said the trust document had a mistake and needed to be updated." "And you told him no, I guessed," Hank nodded. "Your father prepared for this, Claire. Charles never fully trusted digital records. Something about growing up before computers. That's why he always kept paper backups." He led me to his office and opened a heavy safe hidden behind a painting. Inside was a sealed envelope, dated and marked with Dad's handwriting, to be opened only if Claire is removed from her position. My hands trembled as Hank handed it to me. Inside was the trust document, the original, with Dad's signature and a notary seal. "Congratulations," Hank said with a smile. "You're now the majority shareholder of Dalton Steelworks." For the first time since that dinner, I felt myself smile. I waited until the quarterly board meeting. Perfect timing. It was scheduled for exactly 2 weeks after my firing. Evan had conveniently kept me on the calendar invite. At 10:03 a.m., I pushed open the boardroom doors. Evan was mid-sentence, pointing to a slide showing operational streamlining, his fancy term for layoffs. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. 7 board members turned to stare as I walked calmly to the table. Evan's face was flushed red with anger. "Security," he called out. "That won't be necessary," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I placed the trust document in the center of the table. As of Dad's incapacitation, I own 51% of this company, and my first act as majority shareholder is to remove Evan Dalton from all executive duties, effective immediately. Evan laughed. "Nice try. That document doesn't exist." Right on cue, Hank entered the room. "I can confirm this document is authentic and legally binding," he announced. "It was executed 6 months ago and has been in safe storage since then." The board members began whispering among themselves. Evan's face drained of color as he realized what was happening. Then, without warning, his eyes rolled back and he collapsed onto the boardroom floor. Chaos erupted. Someone called 911. Richard Lane, Evan's closest ally on the board, rushed to his side while glaring at me as if I'd physically attacked him. The paramedics arrived within minutes. By then, Evan was conscious but disoriented. Not a heart attack, they said. Just shock. As they wheeled him out, he pointed a shaking finger at me. "This isn't over," he hissed. I turned to face the remaining board members, who were still processing what had just happened. "I suggest we continue this meeting. We have a company to run." 3 members immediately sided with Richard, claiming the document needed to be verified before any changes could be made. The other 3 looked uncertain. Hank stepped forward. "The document has already been verified by myself and 2 other attorneys. Miss Dalton is legally the controlling shareholder of this company. Any attempt to block her authority would result in personal liability for board members." That changed the tone quickly. We adjourned with a tentative agreement. I would be reinstated as COO while a special committee reviewed the situation. But I knew this was just the beginning. The board was divided, and Evan wouldn't go down without a fight. That night, I returned to my apartment and finally allowed myself to cry. My first day back, I noticed something odd. The security cameras in the executive hallway were missing. When I asked about it, the receptionist looked away nervously. Jose, our head of security for 15 years, pulled me aside later that day. "Miss Dalton, those cameras have been disabled for months. Mr. Evan ordered it himself right after your father's stroke. Why wasn't this in any security reports?" I asked. Jose looked down. "He said it was a privacy matter for the executive team. When I questioned it, he threatened my job." He hesitated. "There's more. He had the cameras in the financial office disabled too." A chill ran through me. Disabled cameras meant no visual record of who went in or out, or what documents might have been accessed. "And the server room?" I asked. "Same thing. All on the same day." I thanked Jose and promised him protection. That evening, I called our IT director at home. He confirmed that Evan had ordered all security footage from the previous 3 months to be wiped due to a system upgrade. Evan wasn't just power-hungry. He was covering his tracks. But what was he hiding? I needed answers, but I couldn't trust anyone inside the company yet. Too many people owed their positions to Evan. So I reached out to Melissa Wong, a forensic accountant who had helped Dad once when we suspected a vendor of double billing. I swore her to secrecy and gave her remote access to our financial systems. "Give me 3 days," she said. "I'll find whatever there is to find." She called me on day 2, her voice tense. "Claire, you need to see this. Now." I met her at a coffee shop away from the office. She opened her laptop and showed me a series of transactions, dozens of wire transfers over the past 8 months, totaling $6.2 million. "These were disguised as supplier payments," she explained, "but the money never reached any of your actual suppliers. Instead, it was routed through shell companies before ending up here." She pointed to account numbers at banks in the Cayman Islands. My stomach dropped. "Can you trace who owns those accounts?" She nodded grimly. "Already did. They're registered to companies owned by someone named Edward Dalton." Edward, Evan's middle name. My brother hadn't just fired me. He'd been systematically stealing from our family company for months. The embezzlement was sophisticated. Melissa showed me how Evan had created fake vendors with names similar to our real suppliers, Precision Metal Works, instead of Precision Metalworking, for example. He'd set up the accounts to require only one approval signature for payments under $250,000, his own. He's been careful, Melissa explained. Never too much at once, spread across different departments so no single budget would show a major discrepancy. There were 5 shell companies in total, all registered in the Caymans under variations of his middle name. The money trail eventually led to a private investment account in Zurich. This isn't opportunistic theft, I realized. He's been planning this for a long time. There's more, Melissa said, scrolling to another spreadsheet. After your father's stroke, the frequency of transfers increased dramatically, almost as if he thought he was running out of time. I finished, or thought he finally had free rein. I asked Melissa to document everything and prepare a confidential report. Then I called Hank. We have 2 options, Hank said after I explained. Go to the FBI immediately or confront him privately first. I thought about Dad, still in rehab, and the company's reputation. Let's try it my way first, I decided. I texted Evan, coffee tomorrow. Just us, neutral ground. We met at a small cafe downtown. He arrived looking confident, his collapse apparently forgotten. Changed your mind about the company? He asked smugly. Ready to accept a severance package? I smiled pleasantly and slid a folder across the table, mirroring exactly what he'd done to me at dinner. What's this? He asked, opening it. Inside were printouts of the wire transfers, shell company registrations, and bank records, all highlighted in yellow with his name circled in red. The color drained from his face. $6.2 million, I said quietly, stolen over 8 months through fake vendors, 5 shell companies, 1 Swiss account. He started to speak, but I held up my hand. Here's what happens next. You're going to return every penny by the end of the week. You'll sign a non-compete agreement. Then you'll disappear. No criminal charges, no public scandal. And if I don't, his voice was barely a whisper. I leaned in close. Then I go to the FBI with all of this. Embezzlement, fraud, money laundering. That's minimum 10 years, Evan. He stared at me, hatred in his eyes. You have 48 hours. That night, I worked late at the office, trying to understand the full scope of Evan's changes during his brief time as CEO. Around midnight, I finally headed to the parking garage. My car was there, but something was wrong. All 4 tires were slashed. The driver's side window was smashed. My laptop bag, which I'd left on the passenger seat, was gone. A security guard found me standing there in shock. Miss Dalton? Are you okay? What happened? I knew exactly what happened. Evan was sending a message. But he'd miscalculated. My company laptop was just a decoy. I'd been using a separate secured computer for the investigation, which was safely locked in Hank's office. I called the police, filed a report, then took a taxi home. As I approached my apartment door, I noticed slight scratches around the lock. Someone had tried to get in. I turned around and went straight to a hotel instead. This wasn't just business anymore. Evan was getting desperate and dangerous. The next morning, I implemented new security protocols at the office and hired private security for myself. Then I sent Evan a simple text, clock's ticking, and every attempt to threaten me adds another 0 to the non-compete penalty clause. The special board committee called an emergency meeting. Richard Lane was leading the charge, demanding to see proof of my claims to majority ownership. Miss Dalton's sudden reappearance and these wild accusations against her brother are concerning, he announced to the room, especially given Mr. Dalton's current health situation. I studied Richard carefully. His loyalty to Evan had always seemed excessive for a board member. Now it made sense. Mr. Lane, I said calmly, before we continue, I'd like to clarify something. How long have you been promised the COO position after my removal? His face reddened. The other board members looked at him in surprise. That's absurd, he sputtered. I opened a folder and pulled out printed emails, correspondence between him and Evan discussing his future role and compensation package. Your private email isn't as private as you thought, I bluffed, having found nothing but suspecting everything. Would you like me to read these aloud? He fell silent, confirming my guess. I move to remove Richard Lane from the board, effective immediately, said Margaret Chen, our longest-serving board member. This represents a clear conflict of interest. The vote was 5-2. Richard grabbed his things and stormed out, but not before promising, "You'll regret this." Another ally of Evan's removed. But I knew there would be more. Early the next morning, there was a knock on my office door. It was Camila Rodriguez, our senior engineering director. She'd been with the company for 20 years, starting as an intern during Dad's early expansion. "I need to show you something," she said, placing a thick binder on my desk. Inside were photocopies of project budgets spanning the last 4 years, all with handwritten notes in the margins. "I've been keeping my own records," she explained. "Your brother has been manipulating project budgets since before your father's stroke. Inflating costs, then directing the excess to special innovation funds that never produced anything." The pattern was clear. Small amounts at first, then gradually larger sums, always with a plausible explanation that no one questioned. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked. Camila's expression hardened. "Because he fired 3 of my best engineers yesterday, all people who questioned his methods. People with families. Then he told me I was next if I didn't get with the program." I realized we had more allies than I thought, people who had been waiting for someone to finally stand up to Evan. "What do you need from me?" Camila asked. "Help me rebuild what he broke," I answered. She smiled, with pleasure. I was reviewing security footage when a name in the visitor log caught my eye. Andrea Chen from HR had hosted multiple closed-door meetings with Evan, always after hours. Andrea had been hired just 3 months ago, right after Evan became interim CEO. Something felt off. I called Margaret Chen, our board member who had moved to oust Richard. "Margaret, is Andrea Chen related to you?" I asked. "Not that I know of," she replied. "Why?" I pulled Andrea's personnel file. Her references checked out perfectly, too perfectly. And her previous employer was listed as BCG Consulting, a company that didn't seem to exist beyond a basic website. I set up a casual lunch with her, positioning it as a getting-to-know-you meeting. 20 minutes in, she let slip a detail about growing up in Seattle, but her file listed her hometown as Chicago. Back in my office, I had our IT team run a deeper background check. Andrea Chen was actually Andrea Collins. She had changed her name just before being hired. And her last employer? A private security firm frequently used by corporate spies. Evan had planted her in HR to access employee information and monitor potential threats to his position. I called security to escort her from the building. As they let her out, she smiled coldly. "He knew you'd figure it out eventually. Too little, too late." The company needed stability and transparency. I called a town hall meeting for all employees. The main conference room was packed, with video links to our other locations. I stood before them, heart pounding. "First, I want to apologize," I began. "The confusion and upheaval of recent weeks has affected all of you, and that's not fair." Faces looked back at me, some hopeful, others suspicious. "I'm going to be completely honest about what's happened. My brother attempted to take control of this company through deception. He fired loyal employees, diverted company funds, and violated our core values." A murmur went through the crowd. "Those who were terminated will be offered their positions back with back pay. The projects he canceled are being reinstated. And most importantly, Dalton Steelworks is returning to the principles my father established: integrity, community, and taking care of our people." The room remained quiet, but I could feel a shift in energy. Then James from the factory floor stood up. He'd been with us for 30 years. "Miss Dalton," he said slowly, "your father would be proud of you today." Others began to stand. Applause started, hesitant at first, then building. For the first time, I felt the company truly becoming mine. Evan still hadn't returned the money. The 48-hour deadline had passed, and I was preparing to contact the FBI when Hank called. "Before you do anything, there's something you should see," he said. We met at a luxury downtown high-rise. The doorman greeted Hank by name and took us to the penthouse floor. "How do you have access to this building?" I asked. "I don't," Hank replied, "but the property management company does. This entire floor was purchased 6 months ago by a shell company called ED Ventures." ED, Edward Dalton, Evans Shell Company. The penthouse was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, custom furniture, a private elevator. This was where some of the stolen $6.2 million had gone. How did you find this? I asked. I represented your father when he initially invested in this building's development. I still know people on the management team. When I described what we were looking for, they recognized the shell company name. I walked through the space, taking pictures with my phone. In the home office, a laptop sat open on a glass desk. Don't touch anything, Hank warned. We can't be accused of breaking and entering. But something caught my eye, a drawer slightly ajar. Hank, look at this, I called out. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. The drawer contained multiple versions of Dad's trust document, all forgeries with slight variations in the wording. One gave Evan 60% control, another removed me entirely. He was practicing, I realized, trying to create a forgery that would hold up if challenged. There were also papers for 3 more shell companies we hadn't discovered yet, and a half-written letter to the board outlining a plan to sell the company's assets to a private equity firm, while keeping the land rights for himself through yet another shell company. He wasn't just stealing, I said. He was planning to dismantle the entire company. Hank examined the documents with growing concern. This goes beyond embezzlement. This is a complex fraud scheme that's been in motion for at least a year. As we were preparing to leave, my phone buzzed with an alert from the security team at Dalton Steelworks. Someone had tried to access the main server room using Evan's credentials, which I'd already revoked. The security camera showed a figure in a hoodie running from the building. He's getting desperate, Hank said. Good, I replied. Desperate people make mistakes. We left the penthouse, making sure everything was exactly as we found it, except for the evidence we'd photographed. As we drove away from the penthouse, Hank mentioned something odd. There was a safe behind the painting in the office, very similar to your father's. We returned the next day with a locksmith who owed Hank a favor. The safe contained offshore account documents, passports with different names, and a sealed envelope. My hands trembled as I read the label, to be opened only if Claire is removed. It was Dad's handwriting. Inside was a letter dated 6 months ago. Claire, if you're reading this, then Evan has made his move against you. I've known about his dishonesty for years, but needed proof before acting. The trust document giving you control is only part of the protection I've put in place. There is a second document in the company's safe, hidden behind the false panel on the left side. It formally removes Evan from any inheritance or company position if he acts against company interests. You have always been the heart of this company, even when you thought I didn't notice. Your brother seeks power. You seek to preserve what matters. The company is yours to lead. With love and confidence, Dad. I clutched the letter to my chest, overwhelmed with emotion. He knew, I whispered. He knew all along. Hank nodded solemnly. Charles always played the long game. That evening, my phone rang. It was Evan, his voice shaking. The FBI was at my house today. What did you do? I hadn't contacted them yet. Someone else had beaten me to it. I didn't call them, I said truthfully. They knew about the Caymans, Claire. About all of it. Fix this now. I can't fix federal investigations, Evan. He swore violently before his voice dropped to a hiss. You think you've won? You have no idea what I'm capable of. The next morning, I learned who had tipped off the FBI. Camila appeared in my office, looking nervous. I should have told you sooner, she confessed. When I realized what was happening with the project budgets, I reported it to a college friend who works at the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I couldn't stand by while he robbed the company. I wasn't angry. In fact, I was relieved that the decision had been taken out of my hands. Thank you for doing what I couldn't, I told her. She smiled uncertainly. So, I'm not fired? Quite the opposite. I'd like you to join the executive team as our new CTO. Her eyes widened in surprise, then filled with tears of gratitude. Evan requested a private meeting. Against Hank's advice, I agreed, but with security nearby. He looked terrible, unshaven, eyes bloodshot. The confident smirk was gone. I've returned the money, he said flatly. All of it. Check your accounts. Melissa confirmed it later. $6.2 million had been wired back to the company that morning. What do you want? I asked him. For the FBI to back off. I've paid everything back. There's no crime now. I slid a document across the table. Sign this first. It was the non-compete agreement Hank had drafted. 10 years. Any breach would trigger immediate litigation and a $10 million penalty. He couldn't work in steel manufacturing, metal processing, or industrial supply chains, everything he knew. His hand shook as he read it. "This is draconian," he whispered. "So was firing your sister at dinner." He signed, cursing under his breath. "You're ruining my life." I leaned forward. "No, Evan, you did that yourself when you decided to steal from our family." As he stood to leave, I added, "I'll speak to the FBI. I can't promise anything, but I'll tell them you've made restitution." It wasn't forgiveness. It was mercy Dad would have wanted me to show, even to Evan. With Evan neutralized, it was time to completely restructure the board. I called an emergency shareholder meeting, which as 51% owner, I could do unilaterally. One by one, I presented evidence of how Richard Lane and 2 other board members had helped Evan divert funds and mislead investors. Their removal was swift and unanimous. Hank became interim chairman. Camila joined as our technical director. I promoted Jose, our loyal security head, to chief of operations security, a new position focused on protecting our intellectual property. The room felt different without Evan's allies, lighter, more focused on the company's future rather than personal gain. The next day, we announced the changes publicly. Our stock, which had been wavering since Dad's stroke, jumped 15% in a single day. Customers called to reaffirm their contracts. Employees walked the halls with renewed purpose. The dark cloud that had hung over us was finally lifting. That night, I visited Dad at the rehabilitation center. He was still recovering, but his eyes were clear as I told him everything that had happened. He squeezed my hand weakly. I couldn't tell if he fully understood. "I found your letter," I told him. "The one you left for me to find." A faint smile crossed his face. I returned to the company safe and found exactly what Dad's letter described. A false panel on the left side. Behind it was another document, this one directly addressing Evan's removal from the company if he violated his fiduciary duties. With this, his severance package could be legally terminated. He would receive nothing more from Dalton Steelworks. I read the document carefully, noting Dad's signature and the official notarization. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "Claire, if you're reading this, then you were betrayed, but if you fought back with your mind, not just your anger, you're the leader this company needs. Remember that true strength isn't in how loudly you proclaim power, but in how wisely you use it. I've always seen more of myself in you than in your brother. Now you know why. With love and pride, Dad." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk. Dad had planned for everything, even Evan's betrayal. He'd created a path for me, but I had to be strong enough to walk it myself. The next day, I had Evan's clearance permanently revoked from all company systems. His name was removed from the website. His office was emptied. It was as if he'd never been there at all. Dad's recovery was progressing well. The doctors were optimistic that with physical therapy, he'd regain most of his functionality. I visited him every evening, updating him on the company's progress. Sometimes he seemed to understand completely. Other times he would drift off mid-conversation. Tonight was different. When I arrived, he was sitting up in a chair rather than lying in bed. His eyes were sharp, focused. "Claire," he said, his voice stronger than I'd heard since the stroke. "You did it." I nodded, fighting back tears. "Yes, Dad. The company's safe. Evan can't hurt it anymore." He gestured for me to come closer. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. "You did exactly what I hoped you would." I told him everything. The hidden trust document, the shell companies, the stolen money, the penthouse, the forged documents. As I spoke, I noticed something odd. Dad wasn't surprised by any of it. In fact, he was smiling slightly, as if everything was proceeding according to a plan. "Dad," I said slowly, "did you know all of this would happen?" He took a deep breath and reached for my hand. "There never was a stroke, Claire." I stared at him in shock. "What?" "I faked it," Dad admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. A good enough performance to fool the doctors initially. Then I simply didn't recover as quickly as expected. I sat back, stunned. But why? The tests, the hospital? "Money can buy convincing medical records," he said. "And I have a friend who's a specialist. He helped make it look real." My mind raced to process this. "So all of this, Evan taking over, me getting fired, you let it happen?" Dad nodded slowly. "I had to know what Evan would do if he thought I was incapacitated. And I had to know what you were made of, Claire. If you could fight back the right way, with strategy, not just emotion. You let him fire me, I said, voice shaking. You watched me lose my position, my reputation. And then I watched you earn it back, he finished. Not through inheritance or birthright, but through your own strength and intelligence. I didn't know whether to hug him or scream at him. The company was always meant to be yours, Claire, but you needed to know you could protect it. From anyone, even family. And now you do. He smiled, the same smile I remembered from childhood. You didn't just win, Claire. You earned it. 1 month later, I sat at the desk in the CEO's office, my office now. Dad had officially retired, though he still came in twice a week to consult. His recovery had been miraculously swift once his test was complete. Evan was gone. Last I heard, he'd moved to Arizona to work for a distant cousin's small business. The non-compete agreement ensured he couldn't touch our industry. Evan's old office had been converted into a meditation and wellness room for employees, a symbolic transformation of his toxic presence into something healing. I picked up the new plaque that had just arrived for my desk. It read simply, Claire Dalton, Chief Executive Officer. My phone buzzed with a text from Camila. Board meeting in 5 minutes. The new factory proposal is ready. I gathered my notes and headed toward the boardroom. Employees nodded respectfully as I passed. Not with fear, as they had with Evan, but with genuine respect. In the end, Dad's elaborate test had taught me something valuable. True power isn't about control or fear. It's about building something worth protecting. I hadn't just taken back the company. I'd earned the right to lead it forward. And I would do it not through intimidation or deception, but through the quiet, calculated strength that had been inside me all along.